Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. I have my friend and colleague and just all around good guy, Brad C. with Kentuckiana Mortgage Group with me today. Brad is the co founder and CEO of Kentuckiana Mortgage Group. He's also in the top 1% of all mortgage brokers in the entire nation. He and his team do a fantastic job here in Southern Indiana, helping real estate buyers get loans and just through their financial pictures. I brought him in today just to talk. Look, we're doing a three-part series given the COVID-19 crisis and everything that's going on. We're going to look at a three-part series that we're calling Survive, Revive, and Thrive. And I brought in Brad today because he's all in on the financial picture, helps people with their finances, ultimately getting them to the place where they can borrow money and qualify for a mortgage. So I wanted to bring him in today to help talk about how do we survive financially in this crazy, chaotic time. So Brad, just to say hello and anything you want to add to your intro there.
Pretty glowing intro. I appreciate that, Mike. Yeah, honestly, just here to just try to offer some advice and provide some resources for people that may need them in these kind of trying times that we're in as really kind of the whole world right now. So hopefully we can provide some information and help some people out.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're going to do a three-part series: survive, revive, and thrive during this COVID-19 crisis. Today, we're talking about surviving, and that we're going to look a lot at the financial picture. Brad, you said it's chaotic right now. Things are moving fast. People's financial pictures are changing by the day. Sometimes it feels like by the second. Talk to us a little bit. Give us a sense. What are you seeing from the people that you're working with out there as far as finances go and the crisis?
Yeah, we're still able to approve people. The lending guidelines have tightened a little bit. So, some of the lower end credit scores we've kind of been taken out of the market, unfortunately. But we're still doing a lot of pre-quals. We've had, more than a handful of clients get accepted offers this week, and things are still moving. As long as, we've got the credit we need and there's no income impact or, job loss situation, we're still able to handle and do loans.
Yeah. So you're still working. Houses are still
Absolutely.
selling. And if people are
Mhm.
getting for qualified for loans, that means there are still plenty of people that have jobs and are still working as well.
Absolutely, there are. I don't know exactly how many we have as a team going right now, but it's a decent amount.
Yeah.
More than I kind of expected, I think, when this whole thing started, which is a really positive thing.
Yeah. So we see a lot of negativity in the news, but there's still some positive stuff out there. Some people still are working, still able to qualify for loans, which means their finances should be good. But we're here today to kind of address the folks who maybe are starting to struggle a little bit, or maybe have had some job loss or work hour reductions, things like that. So, um, you and I had talked previously. You kind of have 4 points of emphasis when you're working with people with their finances. And I'm going to just run through those and then we'll break them down individually if that's okay. Uh,
Absolutely.
you talk about cutting expenses, setting tripwires, and that's an interesting one that I want to make sure we discuss in detail. Kind of budgeting going forward, or what you call new budgeting, and then protecting your credit and or credit repair. So let's just start unpacking those. Talk about cutting expenses, what that means, and kind of what specific action items people can take.
I approach this now kind of from a business perspective, being an owner of a company, and applied it to my personal as well. Um, I think the best thing and the easiest thing to do is go through and pull your bank statements and credit cards from the previous 3 months, or go back to the 1st of January and see what exactly you're spending money on. What do you have subscriptions for? What are your monthly expenses? Obviously you're going to have, rent and utilities and things like that. Those are going to be your needs. But you're also going to have entertainment, eating out, and it's great to support local with these local restaurants and stuff. They've been hit pretty hard, and ordering takeout's great, but maybe it's not in your budget right now. So maybe that's something to look at. So I think just separating out your needs and wants, and I think the easiest way to do that is just look at bank statements and credit card statements and see what you're spending your money on. I know I'm guilty of signing up for a 10-day free trial of Hulu, and then all of a sudden 4 months later I realize I'm still paying for it and I haven't watched anything on Hulu. So it's just looking at those things and diving in deep to what your expenses are.
Yeah. Brad, you're a business owner, CEO. I'm a business owner. In good times, we tend to, for better or for worse, we tend to add on products, services, subscriptions. We've got the revenue, we've got the money to cover those. But in times like these, if you start seeing revenue drop, it's important to start going through and saying, hey, what are the expenses that I really need to make my money, my business work and survive? And what are the ones that are just kind of extra out there that I can cut? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fair. And it's like you said, when times are good, you sign up and you do things that maybe you wouldn't normally do in a situation like this. And there's some businesses out there that have a really good business model around offering free trials, and then you put your credit card information in, and they're counting on you not canceling that subscription. So those are the things that you need to look at in times like this.
Yeah. And I talked to the people within my business. Certainly had the discussions with my family. Hey, we cancel it now. It's not gone forever. When you're ready to put your credit card back in, they're going to be there waiting to accept your money, right? Sometimes looking at those expenses, even again from that business standpoint, man, I hate to cut this one, but if we need it in 3 months, 6 months, they'll be there ready to take our money and we can start that service back up again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You talk about setting tripwires. Tell me what that means and how people can apply that to their lives.
So tripwires is something that I've kind of newly found as I've been redoing budgets and looking at stuff now. And I think it's kind of interesting. And so some of the things I kind of thought of to give an examples for tripwires is, let's say you have a savings account and during these tough times, you have to dip into a little bit of that savings. Well, at what point or what balance does your savings get to if you're pulling a little money out here and there? What balance does that get to for you to maybe cut back and revisit that budgeting again? What are some additional expenses that you didn't cut that you maybe could now? So that would be one tripwire. I think like credit card statement balances. So in these times, if you're having to use your credit card a little bit more to kind of defer some of your expenses down the road, if your credit card balance gets to a certain amount, maybe at that point you revisit the budget and maybe cut back some expenses. The other one I talked about or thought of was if you have an unexpected expense over X amount of dollars. So let's say driving down the road, hit a pothole, and you blow 2 tires. Well, bent the rim, all of a sudden you're $600 or $700 to get rims and tires back on your car. Maybe at that point you revisit the budget again. What can we cut back temporarily to help mitigate that unexpected expense? And then there can be a positive side for that too. A lot of people have side jobs or what they call side hustles these days. If you've got a little more time to work on that and generate a little more income, and maybe you can go back to the budget and add some things back in with things like that. So I think it's, an ever evolving thing, and you just have to be mindful to, I think tripwires take the emotion out of budgeting.
Yep.
So, and I think that's an important thing. I may want Netflix and think that I need Netflix, but if something unexpected happens, maybe that's something that I need to cut. And that helps you take the emotion out of that.
Yeah, certainly some people are more emotional than others. So maybe you think that you don't have to set these tripwires. But if you're anything like me, these waves of information and bad news are flying in, and again, hour cuts, job cuts, furloughs, can't find toilet paper. All of these things are coming in at you. And whether we realize it or not, it can be emotional, it can be stressful. You get in that moment, you might not be able to make a clear decision. So you're talking about setting these tripwires up front. So either your savings falls, your credit card balance goes up, or you have these unexpected expenses. Those things hit, you've already decided when we hit that number, we're going to cut more expenses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe turn around pretty quickly and you don't ever hit any of those tripwires. But like you said, I think it's important to set them up front.
Yeah, absolutely. So just backing up real quick, you talked about
Mhm.
the cutting expenses. You say, hey, let's go back and look at all of our expenses. Let's lay them out. You're not talking about cutting everything at once, right? You're talking about some kind of
Oh, not at
ranking
all.
system where we're going to cut out
Yeah.
some, and then we set up these tripwires so we can cut more later if needed.
Absolutely. You can take those expenses and, pull those statements and highlight them and rank them like 1 to 5. One being a necessary expense, rent, mortgage, obviously utilities, you got to keep the lights on, water flowing, right? And then all the way down to number 5, which may be that Hulu subscription that you forgot about. That's pretty easy to eliminate. And then everything in between.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we talked about cutting expenses, setting those tripwires, and then you talk about new budgeting. What do you mean there?
After you've kind of gone over everything, you're going to have a new budget, and so there's a lot of budget tools out there. Excel obviously works pretty well to set columns for expenses, and then columns for income, and a really good way to just look at your budget on one screen, and then you can keep that, save it, and go in and make adjustments pretty easily as needed. But it's important to do it. And I think it's important to put it down and visually see it instead of just thinking in your head, my expenses every month are $1,500. Well, put them on paper or in, on your computer and look at them and revisit them quite often.
Right. Yeah. And look, we've been in an economic expansion for a decade now, going on a decade.
Yeah.
Sometimes even people who used to do budgets, you get loose and hey, the money's there, and we're just going to let the money go where it may. If you get into a spot where you're impacted negatively by this crisis, it's important to know what money you have and where you want to spend it. Right? Dave Ramsey,
Absolutely.
kind of the famous budgeting guy, talks about if you don't tell it where it's going to go, it's going to tell you where to go. Right? So
Mhm.
I like that idea. And like you said, some of these new budgeting tools are very easy to use, user friendly. And again, if you're struggling to manage, having a budget is going to be your kind of your game plan, your go-to resource.
Yeah, my wife and I, we personally use Excel, but I'm sure, and I haven't looked, but I'm sure there's tons of free or 99-cent apps available in the App Store, and you can probably do it right on your phone pretty easily.
Yeah. And I'll make this point too. I used to teach the budgeting classes, and people always thought that it was, the budget was the prison, right? Like, oh, we got to do a budget and it's just going to cramp our style. As business owners, we look at our budgets quarterly at a minimum, right? We're constantly looking
Oh
at how
yeah,
money is being spent, how we need to tweak. And it's not a prison, it is a tool that helps us drive our businesses forward. And I think the same is probably true personally.
yeah, and I think that most people, when they get their budget down on paper, I think they're going to realize that it's not as bad as they.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay. So we talk about cutting expenses, setting those tripwires, starting your new budgeting going forward. Um, I think we may not be seeing it yet. I think there may be pockets of our society where people are starting to get into tough positions where they have to decide which bills to pay. Um,
Yeah.
any tips? I know you really work on that a lot with your people you're trying to qualify for a mortgage. So any tips if someone gets in that situation, how they can protect their credit?
Yeah. So generally, things are not reported to your credit report as late until it's 30 days late. So you kind of got a little bit of leeway there on timing of things. But it's important to know what those due dates are and at what point it becomes 30 days late.
Hmm.
I know that with the coronavirus relief package and stimulus, that credit card companies are giving different options on what you can maybe do with your minimum payment on credit cards, or maybe make an interest only payment on a credit card. So, but all of them are kind of handling it differently. So I think it's important to, if you get in that situation, to call. Most of the time, the 800 numbers on the back of your credit card. I would just call that number and tell them what your situation is and explain to them what you got going on, and see what your options are. Same thing on student loans. So whether you have, federally subsidized or private student loans, call them and talk to them. I think that there's a lot of instances where they're just deferring payments for a couple months, and you can use that extra money that you would normally have in your budget on student loans for other things to keep, your mortgage current or things like that. Um, a 30-day late on a mortgage payment, if you're, depending on how the government and servicers handle the credit reporting of all of this, a late payment on a mortgage could prevent you from buying a house next year if you were planning on moving. Or, there's a lot of prediction out there that rates are going to be pretty low in the third quarter of this year and into fourth quarter. So if you miss one of those payments now, it may prevent you from refinancing in 3 or 4 months, and taking advantage of a lot lower interest rate and reducing your payment. Um, so, in summary, I think it's important to talk to your specific creditor about what your options are, what's going to happen, and what the future looks like if you do either defer or request a forbearance, or any number of situations, that the options that are out there. It's just asking the right questions and asking deep questions around what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got the stimulus stuff, like you talked about, the credit card companies, the mortgage companies. There's different things that the stimulus is saying, hey, they can't do in this time. But we're seeing, utility companies locally in Southern Indiana. We're seeing a lot of utility companies saying, hey, we're not going to shut off your utilities if you can't make a payment. We're seeing companies kind of make these exceptions because the people who are running these organizations, they're going home to families too who may be struggling, right? So there are a lot of
Yeah.
options out there if you are struggling, where you can get some help, where you can get some reprieve, it sounds like.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources out there around this, because we're all kind of in this situation right now together, but at the same time, everybody's situation is a little unique. So I think it's important for you to research your specific situation, talk to your specific creditors, and I think there's probably going to be a lot. There's probably a lot of misinformation on the internet as well around what you can and can't do, and being able to go to a good source
Yeah.
for information is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brad, I just was thinking this as you were talking. Obviously, if you're in the midst of that situation where you're struggling, make those calls now. If you're someone that wants to kind of think forward and think, hey, there is a chance I could lose my income in the next couple of months, does it help to start thinking kind of those tripwire situations to find out now, hey, what should I be paying first versus what do I absolutely need to pay versus what are the payments that maybe I can let ride for a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's just asking questions. Like I said earlier, it's if you think that may be a situation that you're coming up to or getting into, call the different creditors that you have and ask them. You don't have to call them and request a forbearance. You can call and just inquire about it and find out what that looks like for them and for you, and that way you can plan accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been hearing about, and you touched on it a little briefly, we've been hearing about government aid and the stimulus. Uh, any thoughts or tips on how people could take advantage of that?
Yeah, there's I did a bunch of research in preparation that's trying to find some good sources for information. There is benefits.gov, so it's got a specific resource page for the COVID-19 stimulus relief fund. So everything that it does, from checking on your stimulus check to student loans to mortgages to um, you know, budgeting. There's all kinds of information out there. And then there's a pretty good third party source that's not directly from the government. I think a lot of people have probably heard of NerdWallet. It's pretty popular budgeting, financial awareness tool, and I think they do some other things. But they've got a coronavirus stimulus resource page with all kinds of links and places you can check to see where your stimulus check is, and unemployment, and just a wealth of information that's, we can talk for the next couple hours about all the options. But like we talked about, and like you said, everybody's situation is unique, and I think it's best for us to direct people to those resources so we can put links out there for people.
Yeah. Again, that information with the stimulus and the aid is changing by the hour. Congress just passed the new package, so that all information is new. So again, yeah, we'll put those links in so people can get the most up-to-date information from sources that we believe are trusted. And it's probably best to go there and then take that to your specific financial person who you trust and get specific information for your situation. Brad, we're talking about surviving. We got this 3-part series because of the COVID. We're going to do surviving, which is what we're doing now, reviving, and then thriving. Any last thoughts that you think people should know about as they thinking about surviving or putting themselves in a situation to survive this financially?
I think just prioritizing, your expenses and what's important to you, and keeping, and then and planning for the future, and not necessarily next week, but 3 or 4 months from now, or even the end of the year. There's a lot of unknown, and states are handling it differently, and I think just staying up to date with the information and reading, and following the legitimate news sources, and just keeping yourself abreast of the situation,
Yeah.
and what's going on, so you can plan accordingly.
Yeah. Information is power. I hear you say it a lot. You've said it a lot recently. We're all in this together, but we all have unique situations. More than anything, what I wanted to accomplish in this interview, and I think you did a fantastic job, is to let people know you have options. Even though this might be hard and difficult, you might be struggling. There are ways to put yourself in a position to survive this financially. And it's about gathering that information and taking action sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's this too shall pass, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He is Brad C., co founder and CEO of Kentuckiana Mortgage Group. Brad and your team, you're doing an amazing job. Thank you for sharing with us today, and look forward to seeing you soon again in person someday.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Mike. Greatly appreciate you asking me to come on and do this. I think what you're doing is awesome, and thank you.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Talk soon.
Bye.